Oh, give me land, lots of land under starry skies above. Don't fence me in.
Guys, it's Melinda from melindaz.com, and welcome to part 4 of our 4-part series on boundaries. Now, if you're just joining us for today's mini masterclass, please pause the video. I encourage you to go to melindaz.com and watch the other videos from this series first. So you just click on the video page and then look at videos 9, 10, 11, and 12. 9 is just an overview on boundaries. 10 is how to say no. 11 is how to say yes. And 12 is a bonus video dealing with tolerations and touching on what the spoon theory is and how it relates to boundaries. And once you're caught up, then come on back. And because today's mini masterclass is about boundaries and relationships and how healthy boundaries will foster healthy, or at least healthier, relationships. So let's talk first about what boundaries look like in a relationship. So we already said that a boundary, a personal boundary, helps detail where we begin and end and where another person begins and end, so that there's not one congruous, codependent person in there looking to please another. Instead, we're looking for things that serve us and not taking responsibility for things that we do not need to take responsibility for. Basically tending our garden, right? So in a healthy relationship, partners ask permission. They take each other's feelings into account. They show gratitude. They show respect. And then they also respect each other's differences. They respect each other's feelings and perspectives. I guess boundary in this term could be labeled as respect. And when I use the term partner, that just means the other person in this relationship, because there are many different kinds of relationships. Now, in a less healthy relationship, the partners, sometimes they assume what the other partner says, or they feel like if they like something, then the other person should like it too, or dislike, or whatever that emotion is. But they also kind of ignore their partner's boundary and invade. They take over the other person, whether by obligation or expectation, similar thing. And then there's also a sense of unconditional relationship in there, that this is expected, this is entitled, and the other person will just get over it because that's just part of their relationship in the other person's mind. So when I say that boundaries in relationships can be any kind of relationships, I will say that they are a little bit extra crucial when it comes to a romantic relationship, because in romance, in love, there are such heavy emotions involved, and emotions are they can feel physical. The pain of an emotion can feel like a physical blow. We already know that emotions can affect us mentally. They can drain our energy, which will affect us physically. So in a romantic relationship, emotions are running higher, and plus we have a different level of trust and openness typically in a romantic relationship. We expect that we should be able to share openly with that person, and when that respect, when that trust, when that give and take is violated, for lack of a better word, that can cause a lot of problems. Lastly, in a romantic relationship, there's also sex that's usually involved, and sex is one of the most intimate, private things we can share with someone else. So that tends to get the emotions running a little bit higher. So let's take a break and talk what are relationships? What are types of relationships? So we already talked about the family relationship, and this can be your spouse, your significant other, boyfriend, girlfriend, partner. Some cultures just simply call it a partner. But the idea there is somebody for whom you have sexual loving feelings for, different than a friend. Then there are friends. We're just, people we know in our life. They could be close friends, who might know us a little bit better. They might know us a little bit longer. They may know things about us that other people don't know or that we don't want other people to know. Or they could be relatively new acquaintances brought into your life. They could even be strangers that perhaps we want to get to know better. But a friendship is a relationship. The intensity therein has different levels. Then we have the family relationship. Now, some people like to lump the spouse into the family relationship, and there is a crossover there. But for now, I'm going to hold spouses in the romantic relationship pocket, and instead it'll be more parents and siblings and children, cousins, whoever you might see at Thanksgiving. um, that that familial relationship can be a little bit different because people always say blood is thicker than water. And so there's a level of entitlement, expectation, and unconditional value placed on a family relationship. And people can get a little bit less respectful and violate boundaries a little easier when they feel like that person is connected to them one way or the other, that they have to deal with the fact that we're connected. You know what I'm saying here. Family bonds can be tricky, but for the most part, they are obligatory, right? Okay, work relationships. That's your coworkers. That's your boss. That's management around you. That could even be your colleagues, your vendors, your clients. So these people aren't friends per se. Sometimes that boundary can get a little blurred, and we can forget that our coworkers are our coworkers and think of them only as friends. That boundary can be tenuous sometimes, especially when there are issues in the workplace. We'll talk about that briefly, but I think you can imagine and picture what that relationship is. We've probably all been there. And then we have what I'm calling special relationships. These are like basically other relationships. So this is a relationship with your ex. Now, it could be your ex boyfriend, girlfriend. It could be your ex-wife, ex-husband. Maybe you have a need to keep them in your life. Perhaps there's a child that you share. Perhaps there's property that you share. Something even as simple as a dog. That these are relationships that are out of necessity, but at one time they had been a closer relationship. And actually, with those two examples, they were probably both a romantic relationship. So there was a level of emotion, a level of intimacy, a high level of trust. And the fact that they are exes could mean that all of that stuff was broken. But now that they still have to be in your life in some way, you have to figure out a way to cope with it. Working relationships could be under the special umbrella as well, especially if you're working with a family member, which happens so often in a family business. You are, forced to work with a cousin or an uncle or a parent in a working relationship, or some romantic relationships the couples therein choose to start a business together, or maybe they even met on the job and they work together. And how do you balance those type of relationships? Well, those are boundaries as well. We have to set up a specific persona for when we are working together and when we are romantic together, or when we are working together, when we are family, or when we are working and when we are parenting, co-parenting a child platonically, right? So there has to be a compartmentalization, and we have to be aware of what compartment we're in at that given moment in time. But let's move on just a little bit further to classifications of relationships. So we have with types of relationships, but now what kind of relationships could there be? There are many different kinds. These are only a few that I'm pulling up to give as examples. And that's the healthy relationship, which is what honestly I believe, I can assume that we all strive for. We all strive for a healthy relationship. So, what is that? We're going to get to that at the very end. And again, what I'm saying may not fit your mold, but you can use it as a guideline for your own customization. Then we have the unbalanced relationship. We have a toxic relationship, a codependent, an interdependent. Those are different. And so we're going from the healthy relationship to the unhealthy relationships. So let's talk about the unhealthy relationships a little bit to get a little deeper in there. And unbalanced, toxic, codependent, interdependent, they probably, in an unhealthy relationship, you're probably going to see a lot of elements of those 4 different classifications within one relationship. Because if it's unhealthy, chances are we're touching on a whole bunch of different stuff. So these are just stereotypical generalizations. And the first one we're going to call the relationship scorecard. And this is when one person or both people in a relationship, and I'm going to use just a 2-person relationship. There are many different types. There could be a group dynamic. There could be, 2 parents and a child. Perhaps you have an alternative lifestyle where there are multiple people within a romantic relationship. Whatever it is, that's cool. We're just talking about 2 people for now, and then you can put that example into whatever situation you might be dealing with. So this is when you have 2 people in a relationship and one or both of them are keeping score of what the other person or both people are doing. And that produces a platform of blame for the other person, so that when there is a problem in the relationship, you can automatically blame the other person for something that happened in the past. And these are people who are taking copious notes. These are people who take screenshots of texts and they record conversations just to play back later. It happens, but it gravitates towards pulling together a number of things that they've done wrong in the relationship, right? And using it against them. These same people then are also taking note of all the things that they've done for the relationship. So they can say, you did X, Y, and Z to harm this relationship, whereas I did P, D, and Q to help fix the relationship, to help keep us together. And when you play one end against each other, it's just going to be a constant fight. And that's where the toxicity of that type of relationship comes in, because both parties then spend their time deflecting blame. I didn't do it. It's not my fault. And then manipulating the other person by saying, yes, it is, because on October 1st, 5 years ago, you did this. And then the problem is that both partners then spend all their time proving that it's not their fault, rather than trying to solve the problem. So instead of that, I'm sure you've experienced that at some point, but instead of doing that, what you should do is just deal with the issue in the present. And I know you're sick of hearing me say, live in the moment and deal with the present, but honestly, that's all you can work with at any given time, is deal with what's happening right now. Now, I mean, if the problem is that your partner, your significant other is constantly cheating on you, then that's a repetitive habit and that has to be dealt with separately. So that cannot be thrown against the person as a blame, because clearly that's a whole other issue. But deal with the problem that's happening in the moment now without dredging up stuff from the past. and if it is an isolated problem, dredging up things from the past won't help. Because if that was really a problem, say 5 years ago, then that problem should have been dealt with 5 years ago. So what I like to say is that every issue that comes up to deal with on a clean slate. That's like a big phrase for me. Clean slate. I like it. Tabula rasa. Every day you wake up, you get a chance to start again. So when there's an issue, deal with it in the now. Okay? And if you have a problem from the past, then learn to release it, which reminds me, tune in next week. We're going to talk about, or later this week, we're going to talk about forgiveness, and that'll help release that, or just ignore it for the sake of this particular conversation. Now, and just to finish up with this type of relationship, by arguing who did what to advance a relationship and who did what to harm the relationship, all you're doing is proving in a way that you're not working together. And if you're not working together, then perhaps the relationship should not be, right? So you're making an argument to separate rather than to come together. So that's why that's not the best tactic. Just learn how to deal with the problem in the now, and that'll be a better start. Okay? Next, going to a passive-aggressive relationship, or even just a passive relationship. Sometimes it can be aggressive. Sometimes there can get some nastiness involved, some sarcasm, some snarkyisms can come out, and it's the lash of the tongue. Can be sharp, and it can really hurt. But sometimes just passiveness, not being engaged, being apathetic, like that can be equally as toxic because you're not contributing anything to the relationship. So anything passive means that you're not being direct, or your partner is dropping hints at things rather than being direct so that you can pick up on it yourself. That can just lead to nasty. So rather than saying what is actually upsetting you, you or both of you are finding small and petty ways to piss each other off. So then you'll feel justified about fighting. It's like a matter of wanting to fight and starting a fight. Why do you want to fight? That's a why. That's a why question you need to figure out. Okay? So this type of relationship, a passive aggressive or a passive relationship, is toxic because clearly there's a lack of communication here. You're not comfortable stating your needs to the other person. You're not comfortable asking for what it is that you actually want. And instead, you get sarcastic. You allude to something as though the other person should know what you're talking about, should know what you're thinking. You're asking somebody to be psychic sometimes. So instead of that, just be open, be honest. And if nothing else, it's a way to find out where you stand in the relationship. Because if you ask a question, if you ask for something that you want, if you ask for something that you need, and the other person will not engage with you, will not respond to you, if the other person will not try to provide for you what it is that you say you want or need, then you have a pretty good picture of how that relationship is. That would be a little bit one-sided, wouldn't it? So at that point, you get to then make a decision as to what happens with that relationship. And we'll talk about that towards the end. Blaming your partner for your own emotions. So this is another type of unhealthy relationship. And this manifests in a couple of different ways. But mostly it's about taking out your feelings on your partner because they're the closest ones to you. So you had a crappy day and your boss is on your ass and the traffic was terrible, and you come home and this person is there and you lash out at them, right? I think we've all been there. That goes to the familiarity breeds contempt kind of idea, that the person who's closest to you, the person who's in your space the most, the person that you actually feel the biggest connection toward, sometimes you feel like you can just let loose on them and they'll stick around because they've done so in the past, because there's that unconditional love between you two, and it's their obligation to stay with you. Because maybe you feel that you've withstood their own, anger and outbursts in the past. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff going on here. You're calling on things from the past. You're calling in familiarity. But blaming your partner for your own emotions is selfish. It's a subtle form of selfishness, perhaps. Sometimes it can be very overt selfishness, but it's also a really classic example of low or no personal boundaries. Because if you set a precedent that your partner is responsible for how you feel, that you make me feel this way, or I can take out the way I feel on you, because where I begin and you start has no differentiation, then you're creating a codependency. You're creating resentment, because you're flowing your emotions to the other person, and the other person is just going to eventually get fed up with that. So instead, take responsibility for your own emotions. And on the other side, you can expect your partner to take responsibility for their own emotions. And you could even be so blunt and direct, not passive aggressive, as to say, look, I've had a really bad day and I'm going nuts. So would it be okay with you if I just kind of hold up in the other room by myself and, just decompressed? I can't talk right now. I really don't want to take it out on you. So right now I'm just going to deal with this and get past it. Or you might say, I need to deal with this. Will you listen to me? Some people deal with it in different ways, but if you're open and honest and nip it in the bud and say, look, I'm not in a good place right now. I know we had plans to go out. Can we scrap those? I'd rather instead deal with this alone or with you. Or I know you had plans to go out, but I would really love to sit and chat with you about this. Would you mind switching them? It's a respectful request, but you then have to be respectful that the other person might say, I'm sorry, I can't, but I would love to speak with you about it another time. So it's a matter of respect, and it's a matter of awareness. It's a matter of acknowledging. It is all about communication. There is a subtle difference between being supportive of your partner and being obligated to your partner. So if your emotions are running high and it does not involve the other person, do not involve the other person. Moving on, we have jealousy. Oh, the green beast. Now, some people like to say that they are jealous in a loving way. And that's usually when one person gets pissed off that the other person's attention is focused on someone else. They are talking to somebody on the phone too much. They are texting with them. They're hanging out with somebody. They're going out. They might have an innocent little touch on their arm or their hand. And the other person feels like they have license now to blow up about this, to be jealous about it, because they love them so much, right? Well, if you really loved somebody so much, then that type of controlling behavior would really not be part of the repertoire here. What usually happens in a jealousy situation in modern times, and you've done it or you've heard stories about it, is that one person starts hacking into another's email. They start reading text messages. They start following them, tracking them on GPS, or checking receipts. Things that were meant to catch them in an act. That's not healthy. If you're suspicious of somebody doing something they're not supposed to do, then, or at least by your standards, then again, it's communication. You have to communicate with them, or else you have to simply trust them. Some people call those type of jealous relationships, they call that love. They believe that that is how you care for somebody. That is how you show affection for somebody. They cannot recognize that it's actually controlling and it's actually manipulative. It creates drama and fighting. It shows lack of trust. And most oftentimes it's demeaning because of that lack of trust. So if you can hack it, trust your partner, because otherwise you're just going to push that person away, right? And again, this can transmit to friendship too, because if you think that you're losing a friend to another friend, maybe your best friend has started hanging out with a new group of people and you're not invited along for whatever reason, you could get really insanely jealous about that. It can happen in any relationship. Just remember, all of this stuff can happen in any relationship. Buying your way out of problems. Money is a great problem solver, right? No, it's not. It seems easy though, because sometimes a major conflict or issue will arise, and rather than taking the time and the work to solve it, we just throw money at it. We buy a gift. We take somebody on a vacation. We go out to dinner. Whatever it might be. It's a display of affection by the wallet to kind of buy the person off, for lack of a better word, to just buy the person off and move on from it. But the problem is, and the reason why this is unhealthy, is because you never actually directly deal with the problem. You're just pushing it under the rug. And that means that it will eventually reemerge. And when things reemerge, they usually reemerge even on a greater scale. So that sets up that unhealthy precedent in the relationship. And remember, I told you, once you set up a precedent, it's hard to get back from that. And also, this is not like a man's issue or a woman's issue. There's no gender issue in here. It's gender fluid. I mean, what it is it's one person feeling like they can solve a problem by making the other person happy with material goods. And that may work on a short-term level, but either the other person will then start kicking up drama in order to get something out of it, or the person who is actually throwing the money at it will just never have to take accountability for anything, because they've been trained that it's okay, that this is a good way to get out of a problem. So instead, what do? Oh my God, you actually communicate, deal with the problem, talk to each other directly. I mean, I can't say it enough. Being direct, asking directly. We have one life. We don't have a lot of time on this earth. And why we would spend so much time dragging something out by the simple fear of what another person might say or do, and put ourselves in a position where we are subservient to that person's whims, I will not understand. And actually, we're going to talk about that in just one second. First, I want to talk about the unbalanced relationship. And this can get a little tricky. So I want to remind everybody that I am not a therapist. I am a coach. And while I've had an extensive amount of training therein, I know well and good enough that I am not trained on that level. So if anybody deals with any of this, I highly recommend seeking professional help or even getting the law involved, because an unbalanced relationship is one where one person has more power than the other person. And sometimes these relationships can become violent, and they can become emotionally controlling. They can be verbally, emotional, and physically abusive. And if any of that resonates with you, then again, please seek some professional help. I can't say it enough. It can be the hardest one to recognize when you are on the receiving end of it, because you've already been put in your place. You've already been trained, and you've already been led to believe that this is what you deserve. This is what all you're worth, and that this is the best you're going to get. Additionally, it could be very difficult for somebody on the giving end to know that they're doing something wrong, because perhaps this is all that they know as well. This is how they saw their parents interact. This is how they've always had a relationship and no one's ever pushed back on them. But chances are, if somebody has mentioned it to you or has asked you about it, you may be in the midst of it. So try to be aware of that and then take some action. Again, I'm not going to go too far into that because this is not part of my expertise, but I needed to bring that up and I needed to remind you to seek help. Call 911 if you must. Now, moving on to the last one here. It's a little bit later, but it's still under the realm of an unhealthy relationship. And I'm calling this one the teaser. And this is where one side of the relationship has expressed feelings and emotions in the relationship, and the other side has kind of constructed a barrier, but has left just enough of an opening to keep the other party hopeful. You know what I mean? That there's a wall, but rather than just saying, I'm not available, perhaps they enjoy the attention. Perhaps they need the validation. And what they're getting out of it is enough for them, but they want to keep the other person engaged with just enough rope to keep it perpetuating without any sort of commitment, without any sort of participation, for lack of a better word. So this, unfortunately, it's manipulative, and it preys on emotions. We already discussed that emotions are as strong as physical hurt. Emotional hurt and physical hurt can match up very closely. And it also combines that unbalanced relationship we just spoke about, where one person has power and the other doesn't, and the passive relationship where one person just isn't engaging and they're not serving the other person's needs. Remember, a boundary is set up so that we only keep those things that serve us in our life. And if we are in a teaser relationship and we want to have a larger connection with another person, and that person is kind of holding us at arm's length, then we are not serving our needs. And so that's why it's toxic, because one person is in limbo and the other person is living their life. The one who's in limbo is just hanging on a vine. They're unable to fully live until they get that green light, and they're waiting for that green light. And usually, to some extent, those people also put their life on pause for a moment. And again, going back, one life. We have one life. We don't have that much time. The longer you put your life on pause, especially for somebody else who may or may not meet you where you need to be met. And even if they do, they've probably put you through the ringer to get there. I'm just not sure if that would be worth it. So the way to get out of that, the way to clarify that kind of relationship is, let me hear you say it, ask directly. What is this? What are we doing here? How do you feel? I know it sounds cliched, but it will give you an answer, or it'll provide you a new platform from which to jump. So that person might say, yes, I want to be with you. Or yes, I'm being foolish. I know that. And then you can move forward from that. Or I want to be with you. I just don't know how. Can you help me? And now you can work on it together. You also just might hear, nope, I'm not available. Or I think you're great, but unfortunately, this isn't where I'm at in my life right now. And then that other person can be released. They can move on. So how do we remove toxic people from our lives? Once we've gone through these relationship classifications, and we've identified that potentially we're in an unhealthy relationship, how do we stop being in that unhealthy relationship? You get rid of them, I'll tell you that. First of all, the first thing we should do is to make every attempt possible to turn that relationship around. We already went through some of the ways. Number one, be direct, ask questions. Number two, communicate, be open, emotionally available for each other. Three, don't play games with each other. I don't care what kind of relationship it is, romantic, friend, work, family. Just be direct. You have nothing to lose. You're being true to yourself. If you've done all that and it doesn't work, and trust me, sometimes it won't work. I'm sorry for that. Sometimes other people are just not in the same elevated thinking space that you might be. And that's also a sign of incompatibility. So if that makes you feel any better, but if you've done everything you can to turn a relationship around and it hasn't worked, then I say cut them off. And you don't need to announce it. You don't need to warn them. You don't need to say, if you don't do XYZ, then I'm going to cut you off, because that is a form of relationship manipulation. You have to do it or don't do it. Don't announce it. Don't warn them. That's old behavior, right? You're bringing up old behavior. Know your why. Why do you not want to have them in your life anymore? Could it be just the plain old hurt? It hurts too much. I'm not getting what I need out of this relationship. I've been waiting too long for this person to validate my feelings, I'm depending on someone else for my happiness, and I know that that is unhealthy. Once you know your why, be strong about it. Don't let anybody sway you from that. Unapologetically clear them out of your life. This could be whatever form it takes. It could be something as simple as deleting them from your social media friends list. Okay, it happens. Block the phone number on your phone. Block their email from your server. Refuse to engage if instigated. If they get to you some way and they want to fight, don't fight. If it's unavoidable, if they get in touch with you, they come and find you at your place of work or find you at your house or on the street or whatnot, you can say something like, I respect you, but I can no longer tolerate what our relationship has become. I tried to speak with you about it, but it's important that I step away. I wish you well. I mean, obviously that's you're not going to use that script, but it's those feelings. It's the high road. It's calm. It's unemotional. Remember, these are all ways to say no. Be factual, be calm, be unemotional. Serve yourself, right? So if the other person persists, remember that you have rights. You have the right to hang up the phone. You have the right to walk away. You have the right to live your life as you deserve, as you want, as you design it to be. And another person does not need to govern that. Well, what about family, you ask? Yes, sometimes that can be difficult because, as I mentioned earlier, they are given to you and it is expected societally that they are bonded to you. But that is not actually true. If you have a family member that you cannot tolerate, and I use tolerate in a boundary level, if they do not serve you, if you cannot get on with your life in a pleasant, fulfilling way with them as part of it, you are fully within your rights to cut them out of your life. And again, just like saying no, you do not need an explanation. You do not need to justify it. You just say, I'm moving in another direction and you're just not coming with me. The end. So I know that's all easier said than done, but going back to the why, if you really believe everything that you have said in your own mind, the justifications that you've given yourself that you don't need to share with anybody else, but that you've come to terms with, if you really believe those, then then there won't be a hesitation. Then there won't be the guilt and the upset that you're concerned with. And most importantly, this is the big takeaway. When you clear out of your life the people and the things that no longer serve you, you are making room for everything else to come in. So if you are in an unhealthy relationship and you get rid of that person from your life, then you're making room for the right person to come in. Okay? That's that law of attraction, that quantum physics. And it's true, especially in like something like that teaser relationship, because if you've been holding on, waiting for this person to come to their senses and admit that they want to be with you, and you've been closing out everybody else in your life because you're waiting for this one person, this focal point, when you finally have the answer and you have the freedom to now clear that person out of your life, then everybody else that you've been holding at arm's length are now going to be allowed in, and you don't even know what amazing stuff you might discover. So I'll touch on one last thing, and that because I know with every time that I talk about this stuff, I get a lot of pushback. I get emails that say, yes, Melinda, but what about this situation? Or what you said is great, but it wouldn't work here. And I can anticipate that I'm going to hear feedback of, well, what if you like live with the person? What if you're married to them? What if you have children with them? And you can't just cut them out of your life. You can't just walk away and block their phone number. Yes and no. So you do have the resources and ability to change their dynamic in your life. Even if they won't do it themselves, you do have ways. There is separation, there is divorce, there is moving out and breaking leases and splitting furniture and other assets. There are ways to do it. Is it easy? No. Is it heartbreaking? Sure. Does it take a lot of time and effort? Most likely. But you need to decide for yourself if your happiness in the long term of this short time that we have to live our lives, is your happiness worth that? Do you know what happiness is? Have you experienced it? Do you dream of experiencing it? Have you visualized what happiness is? Have you defined what happiness means to you? How does it look? And is that worth going through a little bit of pain and a little bit of work to achieve that? To be free, to be fulfilled, to be happy, to be living your truth, to be able to create a life that you want? I say yes. So, with that, I encourage you to look back over this series and see if maybe you get a new nugget out of it. I also encourage you to look forward to the forgiveness series that's coming, because a lot of times relationship issues need some forgiveness, and we'll explore what forgiveness really is and how other people do play a part in it. Although the number one person involved in forgiveness is ourselves. So I hope you got something out of this. I hope it touched on something that resonates with you. I would love to hear your feedback. You know how to get in touch with me. So thanks for joining. Thanks for your patience in getting this out to you. And I look forward to seeing you later. Bye.